organizations are building and being able to experiment with those. I've had a lot of opportunity to just make experiments here and there, especially as it pertains to um, how do we interact with AI in creative means. So I've been working particularly on tools that incorporate generative AI within design thinking, which has been really interesting because you get to see how generative AI can particularly, especially large language models, how they're particularly able to contribute creative or facilitative um, texts that get the group to like discuss and think and ask questions. I would say that's primarily around what I've been working on, but being able to just experiment with different kinds of AI, different models, and just having that kind of playground has been, I think, really fun and cool to work with.
Okay, well, that's what we're going to dive into. Before we do that, let me just say that Brandon is speaking on his own today. He's not speaking for IBM. He just happens to have that as his current context. So let me start off with kind of a basic question. This is one that you spoke about at the Strat conference in Boulder, but what is human AI co-creation from your point of view?
Yeah. So this question kind of came about when GPT-3 first sort of hit the scene. It was a few months before ChatGPT really became popular. I just kind of stumbled across the GPT-3 playground that OpenAI had, and I was like, oh, cool! This natural language thing can produce text that looks really natural. Oh, and it can look like certain things that people would say. I wonder if it can write sticky notes that we can use in design thinking. Um, so when I started playing around with this more and seeing like what is useful, that's when I was introduced to the research team, and they were working on questions around AI as a component in larger creative workflows. And I think that's an important distinction, is that AI is a component. And the interaction between people and AI to produce something that neither of them are able to produce alone. So that is what can humans make, but what are they also like? What do they struggle with making? And then also, what can AI generate, but what does it also generate with or struggle with generating? That kind of interaction flow between those two, I guess, concepts is where co-creation like really comes together. You're building something with this tool that also informs how you build.
Okay, can you give me an example of that? Like, what was one of your learning experiences early on? Were you watching videos? Were you reading books? Or were you just saying, oh, well, let me try this out?
Oh man, I was watching so many videos and reading just so many books, but I think really experimentation is what came down to it. One thing I noticed was that a lot of the, especially in like co-creation, as a lot of us as designers see it, like design thinking, those kind of environments, the kinds of artifacts that AI would produce were kind of like generic, and it really was dependent on the kind of like context that was provided to it. So when like a good example of good human AI co-creation, I think, is actually funny enough, like games where you say I want to do like a text-based adventure kind of, and you work with the AI to set up, okay, this is the environment I want to work in, these are the rules I want to set up, but this is just an idea of what I have, and then you allow it to suggest things based on the data that it understands about text-based adventures, and together you say, okay, well, this is what my character's next move is. You kind of perform this co-creative storytelling by building the context of the world and then riffing off the AI in order to get your imagination going, saying, "Oh, well, this is the next step in this story," given the AI's suggestion or given the AI's, I guess, I don't like to say understanding, but it's ability to respond to the context you're providing.
Sure. Well, I posted the other day a video of Steve Jobs in 1983. He succeeded in putting together a picture and text in an email and sending it over a dial-up modem. And then he started imagining what the future might look like. And he said, 50 years from now, blah, blah, blah. And I guess what there's a lot of tension in the air right now. People have, there's just been a law passed that anything that's 100% AI cannot be copyrighted. Um, and so I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is AI in its current instantiation, is it creative, or is it the bicycle or Tesla for your mind, where you're creative and that's like a calculator, it's like Illustrator, it's like a pencil, it's like something else that explores your creativity? Or do you consider it actually a partner in the creative process?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a complicated question because at the end of the day, well, okay, it's simple. I don't think AI is creative on its own, and I actually wasn't aware of that law being passed, but I think I agree with it. If something is AI generated without human input, then all of that it really is just data visualization. The way I like to frame AI, especially in creative contexts, is that it's a data visualizer for the aesthetics or like the patterns of uh, language or whatever data it's generating. So if it's a language model, it generates patterns of language, but it doesn't generate anything with intention or meaning or thought or feeling behind it. It's just saying this is the aesthetic of what an answer to this question might look like, and that can mimic creativity really well. But at the end of the day, what it's really doing is just it's a weighted randomization machine that says this is what an answer to that question might look like given the data. So this is where I think co-creativity with AI, and that brings up the question of like, are we anthropomorphizing AI? But co-creation with AI, where a human provides input to it, whether it's through a prompt or whether it's through multiple prompts or a back and forth with the I view it as this kind of machine that allows the person to say, okay, this is what I want the output to be. Then the AI generates an iteration or standardization of what that output might look like. And then the person says, that's not exactly it, but it's heading in the right direction. What if we change this aspect of it? And you go through that process of approving and disapproving or providing ideas or more context. And if a that is a creative product of the person using a data visualizer to show what it is that they want to communicate. Um, yeah, I think I agree with that ruling. Um,
I mean, I'd like to take a step back from that even, and we're going to have time for questions from folks that are joining. I want to take a step back from that about creativity itself. I mean, um, and I'll just use Steve Jobs as an example. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I mean, everything basically from the iPad, Vannevar Bush, his idea of the Memex, and Xerox PARC, everything. He riffed on what he saw, and it seems to me that every human is doing the same thing. We're just combining it in a way that maybe we can't trace back where those things came from, but uh, is it creativity to think of new things, or is it um, just hasn't been done that way before, and now you're doing it that way? So is that, you know, help me think about creativity for a second, and how do you look at
yeah,
creativity itself?
yeah. So I actually really like Rick Rubin in his kind of stance on creativity. He published a book, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, um, called The Creative Act, and he presents creativity as this sort of cloud-like thing where he calls it the source, and it's everything that has been, everything that people do, everything people don't do. It's this kind of internal like processing of the world where you everything is already created. It's really about how do we take everything that's created and put it into a ball or put it into this little like thing that you did. um, and I view creativity as an act as that kind of like sourcing from all of this like information and your own personal experience and your feelings around things, or in more like practical sense through design or through like coding or work or engineering or accounting or whatever. It's working within a limited set of rules and the context surrounding those rules so that you can produce something of your own. It is, I think, at the end of the day, a very like human act. Like information by itself is not creativity. It's what we do with information or things or context or mediums or whatever.
Okay, so I love the cat, by the way. So if I take that back then to the AI piece, like this past year, I went on a journey from Amsterdam to Barcelona and stopping at all the national parks, and I asked Gen AI, so I want to go somewhere that's like Bilbo in the Shire. I want to do photography. I want to just kind of compare nature and AI and kind of learn about maybe what the connections might be, and it created an itinerary for me, and I followed the itinerary actually. Nobody's ever done that before. Like nobody ever told me Vanoise National Park in France is going to be a lot like Bilbo in the Shire, and there's going to be these little elf characters, and nobody ever said that to me. So in a way, it combined things that were there to say something new as well.
Yeah. I that's really interesting. I think it's yeah, it's you're using this tool to source information that you weren't aware of outside of the context that you're working in so that you can then make the decision to like say, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I want to do that." And the cool thing about it is that it's not even just AI. It's like the data that came before the AI in the first place. Like that park always existed and there was always information around that park. It's finding the right information and finding and like pushing you in the right direction that was really useful in that in that context. Sorry about the cat.
No, it's great. I love it, actually. Uh, it's
She's
a new event. Um,
we're introducing the cat and the dog.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. I know a lot of people on the call are wondering, and Strat's value proposition is to adapt faster. We want to help
Mhm.
people adapt faster to the changes, but I know that people are anxious about their jobs, especially in creative fields, and so I'm wondering what your perspective, because you're working, you're a young guy, and you're going to keep doing stuff for quite a while. How do you see the creative job market with AI there? And how do you see us intelligently riding the wave rather than being drowned by it, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think this is a really like complicated question that has a lot to do with like not only what do we do as creatives with AI, but what do like power structures do with AI? As of right now, a lot of what's driving the commodification and like the usage of AI is that we're seeing it as this like tool that drives higher automation than we've ever like been able to achieve before, right? So from an executive's position who is looking to cut costs and save money, that means okay, we're looking for where can we cut our human labor to make it as fast as possible and make sure that we produce outputs that meet our business needs as fast as possible. Um, but I think there are a few unintended like consequences of that, which I'll get into in a moment. But as creatives, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a concept illustrator for characters and monsters the other day, and he's really one thing he brought up was that even in the creative process of coming up with concepts, a lot of the time as creatives we go through like rapid iteration or like rapid ideation, and we'll throw a bunch of ideas out onto the board and say, okay, yeah, this is the direction I want to go in, and that's an extremely important part of not only the creative process and that you're choosing like the options that you have that you've been able to come up with, but also it's teaching you to like think through it and become a like creative person in the long term. It's growth, you know. You to become creative, you need to be able to practice those kind of rough, like long, kind of like even boring, some people might say, like aspects of creativity. So when we're when the full, I guess, value that's seen in AI is to automate those things, we might save money in the long in like the short term, but there's going to be a huge, I think, effect on the skills of the people employed at these companies who are still doing it. If they don't go through that critical thinking process, and we're already seeing studies that like prove this to be true, if we like use AI for cognitive offloading and allow it to do that kind of hard thinking portion of the work for us, we are going to lose that skill, and we're going to lose the ability to communicate that skill or teach others that skill, and we're going to like need to rely on the AI more and more and more and more. So as creatives, and really I think like where I think AI can provide the most use is not automating creative processes, but challenging us through creative processes and helping us um, expand our own perspective and expand like our ability to think about things from different perspectives. um,
Is that the
I feel
transition
like I'm
from,
ranting.
no, is that a transition from being the administrative assistant to being a coach, or is that too much anthropomorphization? Sure, that's a
I
word.
think well, if we're fine acknowledging that AI is not human, it doesn't think, it doesn't like, we can metaphorize it and anthropomorphize it in that way.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, kind of. I think like using AI as an assistant is fine, especially when we consider areas that people struggle with or really don't enjoy doing throughout the creative process. But I think, and this is something I'm kind of like newly thinking about and talking to people about, is like, yeah, where does automation hurt people, and where does over reliance on technology hurt people, and how can we design AI systems in a way that balances that agency, automation, and ability to do their job without it as well, or improve them at being able to do the things that humans are good at doing or should be good at doing. um,
Yeah.
I do think like coach is a good kind of like metaphor for that, but I think it goes beyond that and more of like I don't even like kind of a sounding board or a collaborator, or something that bridges gaps in communication between people. I think that's really it, is what are the lessons we can learn from other people, and how can we increase our communication with them to better like build us up as people who with creative ideas and ability to think critically.
Let me get back to the is AI going to steal your job question. I do a lot of nature exploration, and one thing I noticed is that the animals that I'm watching, that they are coming to that situation new every day, and it seems to me that um, one thing that humans are good at is adapting, and to whatever the circumstances might be, to find the smartest way forward to have their needs met. And so I think a long time ago with Industrial Revolution, the factories took away some jobs because instead of assembling that jacket, the factory assembled the jacket, and the 10 people instead of 1,000 people, or however many it took to assemble Ford's cars, whatever it was. It seems like we made the decision a long time ago that it's okay for machines to replace people. I think that now that it's doing it at a different scale, and possibly with unforeseen circumstances, there's a lot of fear. But it seems to me that again, we're back to that situation where we're kind of surfing the moment. And like you is what I wanted to talk to you today, and ask people to come join us, is to think through, what does this look like, and how am I gonna do my next thing that I'm doing, and the next thing that's required, and the next thing. So my optimistic, permanently in my orange rose-colored glasses, I see it as a big, I don't see it as a danger to our jobs, unless we just want to go back pre-industrial revolution and say, let's go back to agriculture. It's more, how do I surf this moment? How do I get to the next thing? And how do I figure out what's real, and what's going to be my next move?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all of that, honestly. I there's a point where we are provided so much that we need to start asking like what is not only what is good for us in certain circumstances, but what is like healthy for us. Um, I I think like there is a trade-off that comes with automation in the sense that if we have like all of our content fed to us, then we like start losing those skills around going out and finding content, right? Um, or if we trust and like build this power dynamic where technology is taking care of us in every way that we need, um, at that base level of human needs, there comes a point where it starts replacing functions that we need to provide ourselves. Um, this is kind of a tricky topic because like human needs, especially when we think about like emotional and cognitive needs, it's like in philosophical needs, it's very like people all have different opinions about this and like what is good for us, what is good for society, like as individuals, as a society, um, as an economy. Um, and there are things that automation brings to each of those, I guess, structural concepts. But at what point is something too much? Or at what point is it sort of like junk food for us? Um, is there something is the value that automation is providing in a particular circumstance helping build us up as people and make us more connected, or is it making us to both to ourselves and others, or is it something that is replacing our ability to connect with ourselves and others? I think that's a really important question to ask when it comes to automation of any kind, not just like AI. Now, when it comes to like AI replacing jobs, that goes to questions of like the economy and like self-fulfillment. Like people like doing jobs, people like doing things that make them that like contribute value to themselves and to like their community and the people they need to like work with and protect and connect with. But under like the economic circumstances, like growth is like the like large factor of like what goes into building automations right now, and like the growth of like companies and profit. And that's where it gets a little tricky, where are we prioritizing the needs of businesses and profit over the needs of people and communities?
Yeah, no, great question. And I'm going to go back to the Matrix, where Morpheus is saying to Neo, sorry, this reference doesn't click with some people here, but where he says, the machine can never be as fast as you because it's responding to things that are already known, whereas you can do things that are not yet known. And it seems to me that that safety and creativity are in some ways at odds with each other, because you've ever had the feeling when you're on a project and you're like, I have to come up with something, and they're waiting for this, they're paying
Yeah.
for this, I'm doing this. It's kind of scary. Like we went into the room and started doing all this stuff on the whiteboard. It's a little bit intimidating, but afterwards it's like, wow, how do we come up with that? Because we went through that challenging process. So I guess I'm wondering, it seemed to me like the user experience, the product design field was kind of sleepy, in 2019. And that it was kind of the same processes, just make it a little bit faster, a little bit better, use some more data. And it's like, wake up, now, oh, you have to try, you have to do something. And I wonder if that could be a trigger for even greater creativity on a personal level.
I think so. I one thing I've really noticed about the UX profession and industry, and I mean the tech industry as a whole, is like there's so much more emphasis on like design systems now and design patterns and competitive analysis and comparative analysis. And that's always kind of been a thing with UX, but when we're talking about systems thinking and we start understanding like the patterns of what makes a good user experience and the adaptability of those patterns from one application to another, we start seeing like the same interactions over and over and over again, right? And UX starts becoming a profession of adapting to our user needs, using the lessons that we've learned already. Um, and there are fewer and fewer like greenfield areas to explore now, I think. Um, and I think that's kind of a I think that's kind of an effect of like this larger realm of like community oriented communication, but it's also making it so it's less creative, and creative isn't always like what's best for the business, which is what a lot of UX people do UX for, is the business. And I think that's an important reality, is that um it's creativity isn't like the, I guess, end product. It's being able to facilitate a good communication of and good value between the user and the business. Um, that balance is kind of like a really tricky thing to build. And I think that's really where the value of UX people come in, and that's where like creativity really comes in. But it's still um, something that like when other businesses are successful doing things that are very like tangential or like similar to what your business is doing, just in a different way or in a different light, then you want to make sure that the experience for the end user is like familiar and they're able to navigate it. And that requires not necessarily creativity, but making sure that they can navigate it. Um, Creativity comes in when we do things that are like personal or community oriented, I think, and relate to the specific context that we're working in. If we're trying to reach like a few specific people, there's a lot more room for creativity because you're working with a much more limited context. But if we're trying to reach everyone, then creativity is, I guess, less so the priority because you're trying to reach everyone and you're building these standardized experiences.
Well, I'm going to leave behind this theme in a second, and I'm also going to get to questions in about 5 minutes. We can do that through chat. But I feel like the concept of safety is very important. For doing the nature exploration I do, I learned safety first, before anything else. That moose is really big, and I better not go take a picture of it. Driving on the edge of the Tetons and so forth, safety first, by all means. But I think there's kind of an illusion of safety. Like 5 years ago, the large platform companies were sucking up UX and PhDs and user researchers and so forth. And then a lot of them lost their jobs, not because of AI, but because of the pandemic, because of changing macroeconomic circumstances. So the safety wasn't really there to begin with. And then also in 2017, Salesforce gave a presentation about AI designing websites and testing them in real time and doing thousands of iterations and so forth. If we're in a non-creative aspect of creation, that is sort of boilerplate or blueprint kind of creation, we already lost that battle. There's no way that that's going to be a safe place to be. So I think that's why I want to have people like you come onto the Strat stage and onto this virtual stage, because I feel like we have to see the examples of people that are finding their way into things that are difficult to imitate and that are difficult to produce other ways. And so, thank you for sharing your ideas with us on that. Let me
Thank you.
ask you to dig a little deeper about that. And again, I'm going to get to questions in about 5 minutes in the chat. But what's your approach to design and co-creative AI, like from a work-a-day
Mhm.
principle? Um, like, tell me a story about how you work, basically in co-creation.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I've really noticed I've been doing lately when it comes to using AI tools is, well, there are a couple of things. Getting it to do things I am not really interested in learning how to do. Like I I've tried I've kind of tried forever to like become a coder. And um I'm kind of just not good at it. So when I can use AI to code a quick prototype based on my own intuition and knowledge and like creativity and like what I just want to like test out, it's a good way to just quickly form ideas and put them together so that I can like then use that prototype as the basis of something larger that I want to build, and I customize it on my own. But one thing I've noticed is when I use AI, even in those circumstances, but especially if I'm just like thinking through ideas or using AI as kind of a sounding board in co-creative ways, is that a lot of the time I don't use the like words that AI like gives me to really articulate what I need. A lot of the time I've noticed it's given me a lot of ways to not like articulate what I want to to say. Um, an example of this is an essay I just wrote where I had all of my ideas, and where AI, they're kind of from like so many different angles of where design comes in, because at the end of the day design is like not a it's not like even necessarily what tools you build or the specific aspects of the larger thing you're building. It's like how do you build a system, or like how do you like think of a system and then articulate it. um, One thing I've noticed is that the AI helps me gather my ideas just by talking to it. And a lot of the time, I don't even read like what the output is, but having that kind of interface where I'm able to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking of. Here's an idea. I think it might have something to do with this idea. Um, even even when it responds to that, I feel like I'm already thinking of, okay, well, I've thought through the context I'm working in. Now I'm able to like just write something because I've articulated to something, this is the context I'm working in. So it's almost kind of like using AI, but while simultaneously not using it. And I think it's the environment and the communication aspect of like ChatGPT or whatever that provides that, like, or it's like, yeah, the actual environment that's built between you and the AI that drives creative ideation.
Well, let me ask you this. In a recent co-creation, experience that you had, um,
Mhm.
without any proprietary details, could
Yeah.
you tell me like the context of why you had to do it? There were some constraints, obviously you had to do something. And then tell me like, and so then first I went to this, you said ChatGPT did this, then I went to Illustrator and I put some stuff in there, and then I went back. Can you kind of walk me through like from a tool perspective, what a typical co-creation day might look like? One of your best days, like what were the specific pieces, like Dali or just a Gemini, or what kind of pieces do you use when you're going through that process? Is there an
Yeah.
IBM tool that you're using, or is there, what platforms or systems, or I don't know, pen and paper, what, how does the Brandon Harwood methodology, if we were interns, like what would we be seeing on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I I make a lot of just like little prototype experiments. And the way it usually works out is that I have an idea around either a problem I want to solve or just like a general area I want to explore. And I built this GPT called HEP. Um, and
Called what?
it's a it's called HEP.
PEP.
It's a Yeah, it's short for Hephaestus, which is like a Greek or Roman god for like building or like things.
Okay, now
Um,
we're getting
but
somewhere.
um, but what they so I built these GPTs as things where you could just type in ideas and then it'll ask you questions about like your idea. And so if I have an idea of something, I'll just write my general initial like thoughts around it. This is what I'm thinking, and then I'll give it to HEP. Or I have another one called Pulpo, which is it also asks you questions, but it formats like your thoughts through like a notebook style, like it writes notes for you, kind of. I use that one less, but either way, both of these, their primary function is that you just throw in ideas or context or whatever, and it asks you questions about it to get you thinking about it in different ways or frames of thinking. Um, and that's really good for getting me to like say, okay, this is the scope of what I want to build. Um, it asks me questions like, okay, if I want to make an application, or if I want to make a personal website, like I've been really thinking about like just getting rid of social media and like doing a blog, like, and to make it hard for people to find what I'm writing. But um, it's like, okay, well, what do I actually want to accomplish with this blog? It may ask me a question around that, and it's like, okay, well, I want this to really just be a place where I can like make things and break things and like throw experiments and write, show images of my dog, and like really just a personal space that is like my very like own, and it's not really meant for promotion, or it's not really meant for driving any particular like business or whatever, right? So it'll say, okay, well, how do you want to organize it? Do you want specific sections? Do you want this to be a feed? How do you see yourself like making this a personal thing for you? And it will ask me questions around that. And after a while, the thing about AI is that it doesn't know when to stop asking questions. So you build this sort of over time, this skill of saying, okay, this is enough. Like, I think I know what I want to do. So then I go build it, and that could be with regular tools like Figma, or a coding platform. In which case, if because I don't know how to code, I'll use I like Cursor to say, okay, I have the structure of what I want to build. I've built out the information architecture, and usually that will also be on my own. I'll just make it in like FigJam or Miro or whatever. Um, and then I'll have it suggest a file structure, which then, or like, or APIs, or webpacks to use. So if I want it to be a React app, um, I'll kind of like, this is where you bring trust into like patterns that were like best practices, and where I think best practices are like a good example of where AI is useful here. Um, and then, okay, this is, and then I'll describe, okay, this is what I want on this page. This is what I want the interactivity, and usually it provides like an okay first go. But I know enough coding to like be a little dangerous, and I can customize it once it's done. And I start learning the structure of how websites are built, or how CSS is formatted, or how React is like sources components from its main web pages. And then I'm able to over time customize it more and more and build it to the actual experience I want it to be. So I think that's a good example of like a
That's
workflow
great.
where I'll use it to like create something.
That's fantastic. Well, I have one more short question for you before I look at chat. And I'm very severely ADD, so I'm going to be struggling to get the
Yeah.
questions, but I'm going to do that in a second. But I have
Well,
one last question. Before I do that, short commercial. Brandon is going to be an instructor at the AI Bootcamp for UX teams that we're having in San Francisco in May, and we're going to do this in New York and Austin probably as well. But Brandon is going to be in charge of the prototyping instruction. And we're going to use the Socratic method so that the people's questions and curiosity and work context in the room can be part of the learning process itself. But my last question is, as I envision the future and I look forward to different experiences that might be possible, one that I'm looking forward to is I would love to have a robotic arm that will retrace Da Vinci's notebooks, because Da Vinci is kind of my hero. I see him as the father of UX, and so I would just love not to copy what he did, but just to kind of sense and feel like what it felt like to draw that ornithopter and just all the stuff that he did. It was, it would be a dream of mine to do that. Do you have a dream of an experience that would be enabled by AI, computers, augmented reality, et cetera? Is there something that you've
mm,
dreamed up that one day may be possible?
that's a good question. I really don't know if I do. I feel like so much of how I've been exploring this space has kind of been reactive. I
What about
think,
talking to your cat? What about what about an AI that helps you actually communicate to that cat? No. Okay,
well,
let's come.
I mean, that's where the implications of like, okay, well, are we affecting the culture of cats at that point? But same with like whales. But I think like my dream when it comes to technology as a whole, and not just AI, but I think AI is kind of a part of it, is like, how do we build a good balance between like what AI can do and what we're able to do and what we're best able to do and what we want and what is healthy for us to do. Um, I think my dream is like building out the relationship and interaction between us and technology that makes us just better people in the way we want or need to be better people. Um, and that could mean saying like feeling an experience that you wouldn't be able to otherwise, or it may mean one thing I heard from a researcher at Microsoft that I thought was really cool is that like an architect who like lost their ability to use, like they had ALS, they had lost their ability to like really work through the skills that they had previously, where it was able to use AI and voice recognition to do the same things they used to be able to do. I think these are the kind of things. It's like it's about personal fulfillment.
Wow,
How do we use technology for personal fulfillment?
that's amazing. Well, let me see if I can turn it over to the chat and see if let me see can use this. I'm gonna have to put on my bifocal glasses. There we go. All
I
right,
could see
so in
the
chat,
chat. I saw Nader said, in my opinion, there's a shift from problem framing and solving to how can I produce the solution with the design system. I don't disagree with that. I think like a big part of where design fits in larger organizations right now is especially when you build an initial like UX vision, it's like enabling other people to use like the system that has been built and that the business trusts to solve problems that come up as a means of working through the business. And I think that's good for efficiency purposes. And it's not necessarily a bad thing for creativity either, because it teaches people how to use like the lessons of others. Um, but it does sometimes limit your ability to make what you think is really the best solution to a problem.
okay. Anybody else have a question? See if I can get to it. And while I'm waiting for questions, let me say thank you to Valerio, who has been helping me all this time to make this live. He's going to be graduating soon, and he's a really bright fellow and a great design future, Valerio. He'll be at some more Strat events in the future. All right, so Matthew asks, and also guys, feel free to join with your voice. I'm going to go ahead and read this one, but feel free to join in and just ask questions of Brandon. We have about 10 minutes left. More research oriented than creativity, do you or how do you use AI to build and work from research repositories?
Yeah, I think, well, one thing I want to kind of clarify is that creativity is not necessarily like art or illustration or photography or like design. Like creativity is part of the process of just creating things, and research is a big part of that. But when it comes to academic research, absolutely, I think like one huge potential benefit of AI in the research space is building bridges of communication between researchers. A lot of the time, especially in interdisciplinary like contexts where they don't often have the opportunity to talk with, like if an economist doesn't really, they don't really like talk with biologists very much, but there may be lessons or research that they work on that they for some reason have connections through, or for some reason there may be like an opportunity to collaborate and do something like really interesting or like not thought of before. um, and one thing I really like about AI's ability to synthesize qualitative information is being able to find those gaps in communication and find the gaps in what questions are between topics. Um, so I think AI research repositories are good for both doing research on your own and finding paper. Like Elicit is a really good example. I think there's a tool from people at academia.edu. And there's another tool, a startup out there called Consensus. And these are all like research paper repository AI systems. And they all do somewhat similar, but somewhat different things. I mostly have experience with elicit, and what it does a really good job at is taking your hypotheses or the questions you want to ask and like bringing you research papers based on analysis of that. So I think AI is going to do a lot when it comes to research because research requires so much introspection and extrospection or like communication with people.
Yeah, I'll just riff a little bit on that, Matthew. I was doing the UX strategy for a top 10 retailer a while back, and we were going to do some usability studies and just some home interviews. And then we found out that IBM had done 11,000 interviews and had quantitative guidance that we knew nothing about. We had no knowledge of their findings. And, when I found that out, I was like, oh my gosh. So, wow, that would have been so helpful to have that tool. Let me read Karen's question. Um, Thanks for this, Brendan. Really interesting insights. So many tools out there, it's overwhelming. Can you recommend some AI tools to help with experience strategy and design? As well, is there an easy tool to create an app? I've looked around but haven't found anything very usable. I have no coding ability, by the way.
Yeah. I feel like I always have problems recommending specific tools because there are just so many out there. And I feel like we're kind of in an early sort of something similar to like the dot-com bubble bursting. I feel like a lot of AI tools out there are not going to be here in 5, 10 years. And I think a lot of it is going to consolidate into larger actual solutions that use AI as features. Um,
But if they pointed
but
a gun at your head and said, build
right,
an app,
yeah.
what would you
But
say?
that said, yeah, like I said, I like to use Cursor for developing apps, but I think that does kind of still require a fundamental like knowledge of like how does that building work. But using tools like, um, oh, I think there are like AI prototyping tools out there. Is Replit might be one. Um, I I mean, ChatGPT in general, or like any AI, like large language model, chat, whatever. Especially, I like using Claude. Actually, okay. Here's one thing I really like to do is if I'm coding something, even if I don't understand the code, Claude in projects, if you create a project and describe the context of what you're trying to build and add the files of the code that you're working to its like project knowledge base, you can then ask questions about it and say, okay, what files do I need to edit in order to do this thing that I've designed or this thing that I've thought through. It's so I I'm sure that doesn't really answer your question in a very helpful way, but there are just so many tools, and all I can really recommend is just like play around with them and see like what works for you personally, because those are the ones that are probably going to stick around in the long run.
Okay, about 5 minutes left. Valerio has said V0 or VO is a good one. Anybody else feel free to add something in the chat that is a tool that Karen could check out for no code experimentation. Let me go to Nader's question. Do you have any favorite links or resources for learning and applying AI to design? And I do, after when we post a video of this back in LinkedIn and then the create group on LinkedIn. That's where all of my stuff is going, is into the AI plus UX group on LinkedIn. And when we do that, Brandon, I want to make sure we have a link to where they can get that blog that you were talking about. So keep following your your
Oh
thoughts on
yeah.
this. But do you have any favorite links? I've gone through a few books and many articles. The bulk of it is very light. What are your go-to resources?
Yeah, there's a Medium publication called Human-Centered AI that shows a lot of like what's coming out of the Chi conferences right now, or like other human-centered technology conferences. It was created by one of my colleagues in IBM Research, and it's got a lot of really interesting like insights in there. And I think like academic research is where you can find a lot of explorations around how AI is affecting design right now. I also really recommend looking into people who don't like AI. I do think that Indy Young, she's not really a proponent for AI, but she's open to it. she's a really like she has had some really like influential like thoughts and writings for me personally, just based on how what she knows about qualitative data analysis and where AI fits within that. Christopher Noesel, Noessel, has a lot of really interesting thoughts on AI and agentive and agentic AI, and there is a difference between agentive and agentic. Um, and he's the one that came up with the idea of meaning machines, which is like the foundation for a lot of my thoughts on human AI co-creativity. Um, and I also have just written an article on Medium that you can go and it has a lot of references and links in it, and I think there will be a lot of useful information there. So if you
Sorry, when we post a video of this, I'll put that link to that Medium article. Brandon, thanks for that. We
cool,
have
thank
about
you.
3 minutes left. I'm going to ask you to take 2 minutes for this question. What is your guidance for product managers and UX designers and researchers who are building product experience roadmap? We're working on integrating AI experiences in our applications. How do we prioritize? And this is something that the bootcamp is, our AI
Mhm.
bootcamp is definitely going to target this question, but how do we prioritize the experiences and features for an AI roadmap?
Yeah. Thank you for the compliment, by the way. I'm happy you appreciate the talk. They okay. So the way I like to approach roadmaps for AI feature integrations is one, understanding what's the like your obvious product manager and UX like foundation. Like design doesn't really change very much in the AI sphere. Figure out what the who the people you want to solve problems for are, what problems you're solving, and within your product, like what prioritizing these are the problems we want to solve within the context of our product. Then you understand why would we use AI in the first place, and there are certain reasons for this. One resource linked in the essay I just mentioned is a list of capabilities that AI can perform, and these are things like generate, synthesize, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to take those capabilities, those specific capabilities, and put them in context around, okay, we're going to use this to provide a solution given the problem we've identified and the people and the future state we want to provide for those people. This capability fits neatly within this problem. Um, then you build the interaction architecture around that, saying, okay, let's build a mental model of our user in how they interact with the AI. What is the contextual data? What is the what do we have? What do we not have? And what are the risks in a person interacting with this data? And what are the capabilities that AI provides that allow them to interact with this data in the way that we need them to in order to solve their problem? So frame the problem, find the capabilities that AI has that uniquely address that problem, and then build the mental model and the interaction for how the AI will solve that problem, given the data that surrounds it. Um, that's a high level, but
That's perfect.
feel free to reach out.
Yeah. Also, yeah, I want to say that as well. When I post this video, it's going to be in the AI plus UX LinkedIn group. And then Brandon's information, his Medium article, and a way to reach out to Brandon to ask him more questions. So, Brandon, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate that. You can see Brandon at the AI Bootcamp for UX teams that we're going to have in San Francisco, May 13th to 15th. We're going to have one of these interviews every Friday. So Brandon was the first. Next week is Dr. Mike Oren, who's going to talk about the AI product design process. Brandon, Beledieu, thank you guys so much. Everybody, thanks for joining. See you next week.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you bringing me here.